I didn't know there was a group for blind woodworkers, so it was so much cool stuff to learn and find other people who are trying to do the same thing.
Introducing Brent Hawley.
So they delivered about $1 million worth of iPads to my house. My sons and I set up a kind of a production line and engraved all these iPads that were given out to the team at Apple.
Worked with Steve Jobs for over 20 years.
You know, when you try and tackle it all by yourself, it feels daunting. But when you can find others who've been through it and you can, learn from the things that they've done, it's amazing how much I've gotten out of every time I've come to, an event with other blind people, that there's just so much to learn.
From augmented reality.
I personally believe that's going to be a game changer for those in the blind community, because to do augmented reality, the phone has to be aware of its environment. And the fact that it can do that and track things means that it's also an enormous platform for being able to do, assistive, technology solutions. So I think there's great things available now, but we ain't seen nothing yet.
To the latest technology of today.
There is lots of technology that can take pictures, for example, and tell you what it is, but you can't typically ask questions of it, right? And I think the thing that's interesting with Ira is that you've got a person there who, can do more than just tell you what it is they're seeing, but they can give other information which are, may not be readily available otherwise.
And a bit about blindness.
Wow. You've got to get over that first step of, I hate to say it, but feeling sorry for yourself. This has happened. That's everybody goes through it. It's tough. I think that's obviously the critical first step.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson. In this series of Woodworking for the Blind, we're trying to bring awareness to Enchanted Hills Camp and Retreat in Napa, California, up on Veeder Mountain, and that's part of the Lighthouse of the Blind and Visually Impaired of San Francisco. Over the last couple months, we've all heard about the fires in California, and it did not spare Enchanted Hills Camp and Retreat. Now it's time to rebuild. We got a podcast from Tony Fletcher coming out, and it talks about the history of the camp, talks about his time there, and all that has happened and all that they're doing to rebuild. And that's #Rebuild EHC. So while I was assisting George Wurtzel at the WW4B, I got a chance to meet up and talk to a lot of great woodworkers, a lot of great people. And I'm glad they took the time to sit down and we just chatted a little bit about their story. So today, I'm going to bring you Brent Hawley. Now, he worked at Apple. He's a woodworker. But more than anything, Brent is a great guy. We're sitting on the deck outside the Tactile Arts Barn, where the rest of the woodworkers were in there sawing away, creating projects, talking, learning. Now, Brent, he was at Apple at a unique time. He was part of the group that helped bring Steve Jobs back to Apple and purchase the next operating system. And Brent is probably the only person in the world that had $1 million worth of iPads dropped off in his driveway. Brent had quite a few stories to talk about, but it was really neat to sit and work with him, work on some woodworking projects, and when we found time to take a break, we got this interview. Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson, and I'm out at Enchanted Hills Camp, part of the Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired of San Francisco. And we're up here at the WW4B, which is the Woodworkers for the Blind organization, and they're having I believe it's their 6th annual event, and this is the 2nd year in a row that we've had it out here at Enchanted Hills. I met up with Brent Hawley, and I'd like to introduce you to Brent. How are you doing, Brent?
Doing great, thanks.
So, Brent, how did you come to know WW4B and Enchanted Hills Camp and Retreat?
Well, I actually ran into the woodworking training with George Wurtzel here at Enchanted Hills last fall. I came because I'm recently blind, about 2.5 years, and so someone told me it was possible to be able to do woodworking blind. I'd been doing it for years before I lost my sight, and I came up here last fall and met George and learned that I could, the things that I was concerned about, that there were ways to learn how to do things, measuring and other things in a safe way. And during that time, it was when I learned about WW4B. I didn't know there was a group for blind woodworkers, so it was so much cool stuff to learn and find other people who are trying to do the same thing.
Now, Brent, in your situation, you already built your entire shop, and then you lost your eyesight.
Yes. Yeah, I'd been building up a shop over a number of years and have been doing lots of woodworking before I lost my sight, and I was kind of bummed. I figured I wouldn't be able to do it anymore, but I was very pleasantly surprised that it's just like everything else, being blind, it's a matter of just learning new ways of doing things, and there's very little that you can't approach, just like I said, new techniques. And it's great being here particularly with others that are very experienced in doing this, of learning all the techniques and tricks and of the trade to do it safely and get the right results you want to get.
Consistent results. And that's achievable because you're gaining the skills and the confidence from being at wood shops and learning from others.
Yes.
Just like many of the woodworkers here have experienced themselves.
Yes. There's really nothing that I've got as far as machines that I can't still use. Probably the biggest tool in the tool bag is the click roll, of course. Measuring and marking is the hardest thing. That's typically, as a sighted woodworker is really the heart of everything. It's getting consistent results. But the click roll and some other marking techniques that we use here are work just as effectively. And frankly, I'm now sharing with some of my sighted woodworkers of, gee, you really ought to take advantage of this click roll thing. It's really awesome.
Yeah, that's the tool that got me back into woodworking. Mm-hmm. It's like a template maker in a sense.
Yeah, still like a storyboard or story stick, for making things. It's great.
What projects have you been working on yourself in your shop?
My wife is a middle school teacher, so I actually spend a lot of time doing material prep for small projects for middle school kids that are trying to do some small woodworking projects. And probably over the last few months, that's probably the most significant. But for myself, I've been working on some new shop jigs, trying to make a new table saw crosscut sled and a few other jigs that I like to use when I'm working. And then, frankly, spending a lot of time reorganizing my shop so that I know precisely where everything is. I think that's one thing that's really important, is really having a clear picture of where all your tools are, where the bits are, where everything that you've got. And unfortunately, during the period of time I wasn't using my shop, everybody else in the family thought, oh, what a great place to dump stuff. So it's taken a little while to get things back organized again, but trying to get ready for the Christmas and holiday season coming up, and looking at some projects, doing some things on the lathe and some other small projects, which will be fun for holiday gifts.
What suggestions or advice would you have for someone who is interested in woodworking, who is also facing vision loss, to encourage them that they might be able to do something?
Well, a couple of things. I think certainly surround yourself with people who've been there. The WW4B is definitely a great resource for that from the woodworking perspective. The other is get in touch with the Lighthouse. I know in San Francisco has them, but I'm sure they're available elsewhere. Get a click roll. Learning how to measure is probably one of the most important things that you can do. Between that and listening and to others and what they've learned. If you're brand new to woodworking, I would encourage something like this, like what they have here at the Enchanted Hills camp. They've got a bigger beginners class, as well as a number of classes through the year. I know there are places throughout the U.S. where there's, other programs. Definitely jump into that. But if you've done it before, like I said, WW4B, you'll find people who all you have to do is ask, gee, I used to know how to do this, and how do I do it now? 99% chance that somebody on that list will be able to help you.
You can find that at WW4B, and the 4 is the number 4, so it's WW4B.org on the web. And it's a listserv, and people just keep adding and answering and sharing and helping others.
And there's a bunch of resources on the website as well, with recorded woodworking magazines and other articles that are, I know, available on the site.
Brett, you had an occupation before woodworking. Well, not before woodworking, before WW4B, before you went blind. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I worked at Apple for 21 years, was a senior director of engineering for operating system technology and for Apple's Final Cut Studio product. After that, I left and ran engineering for a company called LiveScribe that made a digital pen. In fact, I know the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco used that technology for doing tactile maps, interestingly enough. So I've kind of been in the tech industry for the last 40 years, I guess, however long.
Oh, yeah. And iOS, I tell you, Apple has been a big game changer for everybody who has accessibility built right into the iPhone, iPad, and all their devices.
Certainly, being on that side of it now, I'm really appreciating the thought and effort put into the accessibility. There's, like everything, it can always make it better, but that consistency across the platforms and the fact that it's just there, whether you're using an Apple TV or an iPhone or the Mac, it all works.
Now, there's a machine called the CNC machine, which is a device that, well, why am I trying to explain it? Could you tell people what a CNC machine is?
Sure. CNC machine, which CNC stands for computer numerical control. Basically a computer-controlled routing device. Think of a handheld router or milling machine, but it's controlled by a computer, so it basically can move the head and the bit up and down and side to side. It's usually used for making things repetitively. These days, you can actually do so much because of the computer aspect of it to do things like carving into wood and to repetitively make and cut out different materials. It's a great resource for these days and becoming very affordable for the hobbyist.
And it does engraving, correct?
Yes, and we'll definitely do engraving. There's something called V-carve, which is it's a bit that has a very sharp V tip and cuts into the wood and can carve out signs and even do what you might consider to be elaborate carvings now with pick from pictures and such.
I overheard George Wurtzel, who directs this program up here for Enchanted Hills Camp at the Art Barn, they call it. He was talking about bringing you out with another gentleman to get but speech working on the programs. Are you excited about that?
Oh, very excited. Although I am an Apple guy, most of the CNC hardware runs off of Windows machines. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we can find a configuration where either use NVDA or JAWS or something to be able to get control of those tools on Windows to be able to use the CNC.
I also heard one other story that was pretty intriguing that a lot of people leaned into. You engraved something onto an iPad one time. A couple of them, I guess. Could you tell our listeners that story?
Sure. I worked at Apple a long time and was involved in the launch of the iPad, the original iPad. And then after the iPad was launched, Steve Jobs, wanted everybody who worked on that project to get one as a memento of the hard work that was put into creating that product. And they really wanted to make sure it was special, so they wanted Steve's signature on the back. They couldn't find anybody to do that. And in my shop, I have CNC machines as well as some lasers and such. They finally came to me because I was the only person that they knew that could actually put the engraving in. So they delivered about $1 million worth of iPads to my house. My sons and I set up a kind of a production line and engraved all these iPads that were given out to the team at Apple.
So every iPad had to go back in the exact box?
Yeah, it had to be taken out, engraved, and put right back in the same box so the serial numbers matched, yes.
So how has your family adjusted to your losing eyesight? Just 2.5 years ago, that must have been an adjustment for everybody.
Yeah, I think, anybody who's, gone through this the big thing is, there's a lot to learn yourself, but there's a lot that the family has to learn, making sure they put things back where they're supposed to and not leaving things out where you can trip over them and that kind of stuff. And I think that's probably been the biggest challenge, is just kind of learning the new patterns.
And your shop is not a storage area.
Yeah, well, that's a current thing that everybody's is learning.
What advice would you have for someone who is not readily or has yet to accept their blindness?
Wow. You've got to get over that first step of, I hate to say it, but feeling sorry for yourself. This has happened. It's that's everybody goes through it. It's tough. I think that's obviously the critical first step. And then, being open to the fact that, frankly, there's almost nothing you can't do. There's just new ways to learn to do it. That there are lots of people out there, who've been through this. I think it's like anything. When you try and tackle it all by yourself, it feels daunting. But when you can find others who've been through it and you can, learn from the things that they've done. It's amazing how much, I've gotten out of every time I've come to, an event with other blind people, that there's just so much to learn that people have done. It's like, tricks and techniques and things that are remarkably simple, but you just don't think about them or realize when you're trying to solve it all by yourself that can really help you along a lot. Frankly, the other thing is the technology that's, available now is just incredible. There's obviously the smartphones, there's lots of apps and things like that can help. There's new technologies coming like Ira, which is, an assistance tool. There's other things that, seem to be on the horizon. Frankly, I suspect that we're going to see some things coming out of the next generation phones and this augmented reality technology that's part of the next generation of the iOS, Apple OS operating systems. I personally believe that's going to be a game changer for those in the blind community, because part of the augmented reality technology is not just for games, but to do augmented reality, the phone has to be aware of its environment. And the fact that it can do that and track things means that it's also an enormous platform for being able to do, assistive, technology solutions. So I think there's great things available now, but we ain't seen nothing yet.
You mentioned Ira, the virtual navigator for the blind. That's a product that works with a glass and an agent, and you subscribe to that.
Yes, yeah. I signed up early in the year when I heard about it at one of the conferences, and it's a great solution. They've basically you wear a pair of glasses that just happens to have a camera on it, and it transmits basically whatever you happen to be looking in the direction of to an agent live. They see it as in real time, and you can communicate with them, and they're communicating with you, and basically giving you information. They aren't telling you what to do, but more giving you information so that you can make the right decisions on your own as to as crossing a street or, trying to find a business or, more interestingly, and sometimes is finding where the entrance to a business is, because you've gotten close to it with your GPS stuff, but you may not know exactly how, where to get in, the building or whatever. So it's amazing. And I know there's a lot of things that people are doing, with it now that are, they're just beginning to touch on some of its capabilities. I know I've used it even in my wood shop a little bit for when I'm trying to do certain setups and things like that, where I would just like to, confirm the things are what I expect. So, it's not just getting around, but having basically that extra information that someone who can see the details can share with you. It's been really, really useful.
Instant access to information.
Yes, with a brain attached to it, because there is lots of technology that can take pictures, for example, and tell you what it is, but you can't typically ask questions of it, right? And I think the thing that's interesting with Ira is that you've got a person there who, can do more than just tell you what it is they're seeing, but they can give other information which are, may not be readily available otherwise.
Well, thank you very much, Brett, for sharing your story and coming to WW4B out here at Enchanted Hills Camp. It's been great meeting you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you, and it's been a great time this week.
Spent a great few days with Brett Howley setting up jigs. That's something that he had in mind, so he set up jigs on the giant bandsaw so he could repeatedly make the same thing over and over again. It worked out pretty good. That was his goal, that's what he set out to do, and that's what we achieved. And it was also great to meet all the others. And that all happens at Enchanted Hills Camp and Retreat, part of the Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired of San Francisco. And remember to go to their website, support them if you can, with what you can. And remember, #RebuildEHC. You can find the website at www.lighthouse-sf.org. And be sure to check out the other Woodworkers for the Blind podcast. That's #WW4B. We thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time, bye-bye.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations and the realities of blind abilities.
The realities of blind abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities. Download our app from the App Store, blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.